All right. Today, I want to start looking at an idea or concept called proofs for congruent triangles. So far, we've used our side, 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 angle, angle, side, angle, 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 side, hypotenuse, leg. We've had our ways to prove the triangle's congruent. And usually that information has either been all marked out in the diagram for us, or it's been all marked out in the diagram for us except for like one other piece that we can mark in the diagram ourselves. So the idea here is that I'm not just going to mark everything in the diagram for you. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe to you some information that is true about the diagram, that from there, you should be able to get the triangles congruent. So in some way, the information I'm telling you should be able to get the triangles congruent from there. And so we're going to actually write out in complete sentences an explanation for why the triangles are congruent. Usually it's going to take about 2 or 3 sentences to write out and explain. So remember what we talked about last week, we need 3 pieces of information to prove triangles congruent. So we're going to walk through one of these to start with. We're going to kind of focus on it when we come back next time. And remember that Friday is going to be our test. So we're going to start these. I'm going to kind of outline how this is going to look, and then we're going to actually write out our explanation here. So first off, you want to make some markings in the diagram here. So first off, A to B is congruent to C to B. So that's our first piece of given information. And that's marked in the diagram. A to B and C to B are marked here in our diagram. And so I'm going to go ahead and mark and say that this tells us a side. So I'm actually just writing out kind of an outline of how this is going to work and what we're going to write. That's what I'm doing right now. The next piece of given information is that D is the midpoint of A to C. Now, this is why I drilled some vocab at the start of today, and this is why vocab is important, because you got to know what midpoint means and what midpoint tells you. So D, here's point D. It says that it's a midpoint of A to C. And so we'll have to think about, what does a midpoint do? And what is that going to tell us? Well, midpoint, this is the connection you have to make. Midpoint tells us that this point is going to split A to C into 2 equal pieces. So this tells me that my pieces are equal. Well, what are my pieces? My pieces are A to D and C to D. And we're going to explain why a midpoint tells us congruent. Well, it's because it splits it into 2 equal pieces. So that's what we're going to write in a second. That's going to give us another side. So far we have 2 sides. We need one more piece of information. And I'm hoping that some of you have spotted where we're going to get that from. So once you've used the rest of the pieces of information, we're going to do the same thing we did last week and say, let's look at the diagram and see if we can get any information from the diagram. And in this case, we can get some information from the diagram. This side right here is the same as itself. So this is the reflexive property. And that will give us another side. So this isn't what you're actually going to write. This is just me kind of making an outline of what we're going to say. I'll show you what we're supposed to write in just a second. But that's kind of our outline of how we're going to get these triangles congruent. And we can hopefully see now that we have 3 pairs of sides that means that our triangles are going to be congruent by side, side, side. So let's take a look at that. So I've started out the explanation, so I'll let you start writing it down over here. So first we are given that segments A, B, and C, D are congruent, which gives us a side. I'm going to mark off something that I like to do when I have, when we first looked at doing these, which is when I have proved a side or angle, I'm going to mark it off. So we know that we're going to use side, side, side. So I've explained the first side that it was told to us. It's marked in the diagram for us. Once I have explained how another side is congruent, I'm going to mark it off. The next piece of information we are given is that D is the midpoint of A to C. This means that D will split. We're just explaining what a midpoint does. A to C into 2 equal pieces. Which makes those pieces A to D and C to D congruent, giving us another pair of sides. So now we've explained our second pair of sides. We've explained how midpoint tells us sides congruent. That's the connection that we're making. Because we aren't actually told that that A to D and C to D are congruent. What we're told is midpoint. And you need to use the vocab and knowledge that you know to know how to get from midpoint to telling you sides are congruent. And then what was our final thing? Well, our final thing was reflexive property. So we need to explain reflexive property. In the diagram, segment D to B is a common side in both triangles, which means it must be congruent to itself by the reflexive property. So we've explained reflexive property, and that tells us our third side. So we can mark that off as well. So we followed along with our outline that you saw earlier, and we've explained all 3 sides. If it's given to you, then all you have to say is that it's given to you. If you're coming up with it based on other information or you're getting it from the diagram, then that's something that you'll need to explain. That is our third pair of sides, which means that by side, 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 and we're going to go ahead and write out the congruence statement, which, just to remind you, is where the order has to matter. So triangle A, B, D. Once I've chosen A, B, D, I'm locked in, and I got to match up my pieces. A matches up with C. This is a reflection, by the way. D, well, that matches up with D, and B is going to match up with B. So A, B, D goes with C, B, D. So you will need to write out full, complete sentences here. That's the idea behind showing that these triangles are congruent and explaining out that these triangles are congruent. So on the worksheet for this week, you are going to have to write these things out and explain them in complete sentences. So you can either write out your sentences on a separate sheet of paper. You can type them into the document if you want. You can write them out elsewhere, but you need to have full and complete sentences. We'll do some more examples with this next time. So questions on any of that? We'll get through the rest of these notes next time. All right. Now, your homework for today is to study some of this vocab. So what that means is I have something similar for you to what we've done in the past when I've done this practice Kahoot, which means I have a quiz on Canvas that goes through and drills the vocab. It's very similar to the Kahoot we just did. Stick around, though. I'm going to give you a chance to exempt yourself out of it. So it's going to be a similar one that we've already done. You're going to have 10 questions. You're going to have 2 minutes to do them. You can redo it as many times as you want, but I want you to redo it and redo it until you get a 10 out of 10.